All right, today we're going to dive into a perspective on love that you are definitely not going to find in any fairy tale. It's challenging, for sure, it's controversial, and it comes from the mind of the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. You see, he saw love not as some magical divine gift, but as something way more primal and potentially way more destructive. Let's get into it.
This story, it probably sounds a little familiar, right? A guy who's successful, disciplined, he's got his life under control, and then he meets someone and boom, everything changes. His focus just evaporates, his goals get blurry, and the rational part of him just seems to go offline. What he feels like is destiny. Well, for Schopenhauer, that wasn't destiny at all. It was a biological hijacking, a total loss of self in service of something much, much bigger than him. So, what is Schopenhauer's big idea here? Simply put, he argued that what we call love is basically an illusion. He saw it as the will of the species, this huge, impersonal drive to reproduce that just uses us as puppets. It tricks us, dressing itself up as this deep personal connection, but its real job, it's to shut down our reason and make sure the species continues, often at the direct expense of our own happiness and our own goals. And this hijacking, it's not random. Schopenhauer believed it follows some very predictable patterns. Patterns of weakness that start to show up when a man's rational mind gets completely overridden by this biological will. So let's break down these patterns and see how this whole process really unfolds. It's this systematic downward spiral. First, all his energy gets redirected. The same drive that could build a business or an empire is now focused entirely on one person. Then, his self-worth becomes external. His confidence isn't his anymore, it's just a reflection of how she's feeling about him that day. This, of course, makes him terrified of taking any risks, and eventually, he abandons his own mission in life, all because of this crazy idea that another person can somehow complete him. Now, this process isn't just in your head, it's biochemical. It looks a whole lot like a drug addiction. You get these wild emotional swings. A quick text message sends you soaring, but a delayed reply causes actual anxiety. Your mind gets hijacked by obsessive thoughts, and you can even feel physical withdrawal when you're apart from them. And get this, the data shows that 41% of men report feeling this strange, inexplicable sadness after sex. That really points to this deep biological disconnect between what we think we're feeling and the chemical reality. And, in this state of total dependency, one of the first things to go is his connection to other men, his brotherhood. He starts flaking on plans with his friends, dodging events if she's not there, and slowly he just cuts himself off from the very support system that gave him strength in the first place. And of course, that isolation just makes the dependency worse, creating this vicious cycle of neediness. So this isn't just some abstract philosophical problem. This kind of dependency has serious real-world consequences. We're talking about a man's mental health, his finances, his entire stability in the world. Let's look at what the actual costs are. This number, it represents a tragic reality. Suicide is 3.6 times more common among men. Now, when a man's entire emotional regulation system is tied to another person, when his self-worth and his stability are totally external, he becomes psychologically fragile. This dependency is a huge contributing factor to this absolutely devastating statistic. And then there's the financial cost. The average wedding costs $30,000. This is a perfect example of how romantic ideals can just completely steamroll long-term financial logic. Decisions get made not to build a future or focus on a mission, but to follow this social script of what love is supposed to look like. Okay, let's just pause here for a second. I know this is a really heavy, maybe even cynical perspective from Schopenhauer. It can feel pretty bleak. But I have to ask you, does any of this resonate? Do you see these kinds of patterns in the world around you? Or maybe even in your own life? I'd genuinely love to hear what you think about all this down in the comments. But here's the thing. Schopenhauer wasn't just being a pessimist for the sake of it. He wasn't arguing for a life without love. He was actually pushing for a conscious approach to it. And that brings us to the solution, a path away from this weakness and towards a totally different kind of strength. This slide lays out the two paths so clearly. On the left, you've got unconscious love, falling in love. It's all biology, neediness, and illusion, and it leads straight to what he calls psychological slavery. But on the right, you have a conscious relationship. This is about choice, about mutual benefit, about seeing things clearly, and this is what leads to philosophical freedom.
The absolute core of this solution is something called philosophical detachment. Now, this does not mean being cold or emotionless, not at all. It's the ability to engage fully, to love deeply, but to do it while your internal peace, your psychological center of gravity, remains your own. It's not dependent on someone else's mood swings or their approval of you.
So what does this actually look like? Well, it's built on these pillars. First, emotional self-regulation. You're in charge of your own state. Then, purpose sovereignty. Your mission, your reason for being, that stays your number one focus. You've got financial independence, so you make logical decisions, not emotional ones. Social balance, which means you don't abandon your friends. Value consistency, where your core principles are non-negotiable. And finally, and this one is crucial, outcome independence. You can invest everything you have while knowing deep down that you'd still be okay if it all ended tomorrow.
So ultimately, it all boils down to a choice. It's the fundamental decision every man has to face. Is he going to approach relationships from a place of weakness, just driven by these unconscious biological urges, or from a place of conscious, cultivated strength? This table just shows the two archetypes perfectly. The man who falls in love, he loses himself, becomes completely dependent, ditches his mission, and lives in constant fear of loss. But the man who chooses love, he maintains his own center, he's psychologically sovereign, he includes her in his mission, and paradoxically, he's stronger because he's willing and able to walk away if he has to. And this right here, this is the great paradox of it all. The man who develops this internal strength, this philosophical detachment, he doesn't push people away. He actually becomes genuinely more attractive. And why is that? It's because he's offering a partnership that's built on strength, on choice, on stability, not on neediness, desperation, and dependency. If this kind of deep dive into challenging ideas is something you appreciate and you want to explore more philosophies that can lead to a stronger life, make sure you subscribe to Mindscope Philosophy. We've got a lot more thought-provoking content coming your way. So we end with the question that Schopenhauer's work really forces all of us to ask. In our own lives, in our own relationships, what are we actually choosing? Are we on the unconscious path of romantic slavery? Or are we fighting for the conscious path towards philosophical freedom? The choice, ultimately, is yours.